Okay, so we're live and recording. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think we're still waiting for some people, so take a deep breath and we'll start in a couple of minutes. Okay.
Yeah, perfect time. Get some water.
Yes.
Ready.
Okay.
Yeah, read our text. Get up to date.
Join the Telegram group.
Join our Telegram group.
Okay. Great.
Hi, Ivan from Brussels.
Great. So yeah, you can also use the Telegram chat to communicate. That's great. I know we can't hear you, Yvonne. We can just see what you're texting. But if you want to get on stage, just let us know. Okay. Great.
Yeah, I think we're gonna heavily lean towards English. We're happy to answer every question in German. So if you have specific questions, or if you want to have a German comment in between, we'll just take a quick break and we'll directly get back to you in German as well, happily. But we'll keep the presentation in English, just to make sure that we don't exclude anybody, because I think most of us aren't bilingual, so we're gonna try that.
Yeah, great. Perfect. Before we start with our meetup with Collective Rewilding, I would just like to say a couple of sentences about the next museum and also about the technical aspects of Crowdcast. So Next Museum is a platform for co-creation and co-creation. As you might have seen already, you can see the link in the chat here, and we try to rethink and redefine the museum of the future together. And one main aspect is that we have open calls on our website for upcoming exhibition projects where everyone can participate. So people can join the discussion in our Telegram groups or in our meetups just like this one, or people can join the Telegram group and discuss with us, yeah. And also artists can submit their works. Yeah. So yeah, for the technical issues, we have on the right hand side the chat, so you can put your questions, your comments, or any links you have for us in the chat, or also in the Telegram group. And if you look at the bottom, we also have a ask a question button. So if you have a specific question, you can just type it in here, and people can also vote. So if you like a question, just thumbs up, and then we can see that everyone would love to love to hear you guys answer the question. Yeah, right. And so I would say, dears Sarah, Amelie, and Sabina, the stage is yours.
Yeah, I think we'll jump right in. Thank you so much for having us. I think we're really happy to be here in general. We're really happy to have the opportunity to sort of think one of the projects that we've been thinking and working on for a long time, to have it through your website and to reach people that before we never thought were possible, or a completely different sort of audience, which is really great for us. So thank you for that. I think I'll just sort of introduce, we'll talk a little bit individually about our backgrounds, but also how we got together. So we started a little over a year ago, and it was more of a conversation. So Sarah and I, Sarah is a PhD student at Cornell University, and I was there on a fellowship. And it was very typical where we just, you know, had a few drinks together and we got to talk about sort of interest. And I think this shared ideas, not even so much about artists that we wanted to work with, but a common worldview, a common sort of political idea about why we were in the arts and what interests us about it. And I've worked with Sabina years ago in Venice, so I think we all knew that we were sort of on the same wavelengths when it came to certain questions and problematics within the field. So it was very organic to sort of come from a shared project and then to develop it further. I think it's helpful if we maybe talk a little bit about our individual backgrounds and then more about the actual work as a collective. So I think I'll just ask Sarah maybe to get us started about what you do when you're not having open calls online.
Hi everyone. I join Amelie and everyone in welcome you to our chat and thanking you all for being here, for submitting your works. I'm Sarah Garson. I am actually from Colombia. I'm a curator and writer, but I've lived in the US for several years now. I'm actually doing a PhD in art history at Cornell University, which is where Amelie and I met. But I'm currently also a Metropolitan Fellow, research fellow, and will be there, in New York next year as well. And right now I'm actually a resident, a curatorial resident at Delphina Foundation here in London. So wearing a variety of hats, as you can see, but very much interested in the questions that we're addressing here with the collective, with Rewilding, and thinking about nature, landscape, and environmental crisis that we're going through, which we will tell you more about. But for now, Sabine can tell you more about her.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I'm Sabina Oroshi. I am at the moment based in Hamburg in Germany. However, I come from Croatia. Academically, I'm trained as an art historian and a museologist. And when I'm not working with the collective Rewilding, I actually work in the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg, which is a concert hall. I work in visitor service where we offer a lot of things for visitors regarding culture, music, architecture, and everything in that context. Other than that, I also research. I'm working on researching the socialist sensibilities of the art market. I'm also looking into the post-socialist context of the ex-Yugoslav countries, and that's my background.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Amelie Klein. I'm originally from Germany. I've lived in Italy and the US for a while, so particularly within the Venice culture field, I would say, mainly in the biennial, but predominantly lately with more local, sort of smaller off spaces. So my main interest is in collecting history, political appropriation, particularly through sort of colonial, but also nationalist gaze. In Germany, for example, at the Pergamon Museum, very classic example. I think we all think about these themes right now. There's a Humboldt collection, obviously, so it's sort of my research. And then I work with a museum in Graz, so I just relocated to Austria. So I just started here to have a more permanent position through this moment of crisis. And I think it's a very sort of this moment of crisis was why we became so much more urgently interested in this idea of collectivity. So as I mentioned before, we had been thinking about a project in Venice. So we're thinking about this sort of paradox where on the one hand, most biennials have this idea of representing a whole, a very overview, a very clear idea of being very inclusive. Yet if you look at numbers of representation, of course, there's always going to be a bias towards where a biennial is and who is represented. And with Venice being the oldest biennial, there's a very clear history of bias within who gets represented at such institutions. and the framework that they operate in. So Sarah and I started with a project called the Cartographic Impulse, and it was meant to be an exhibition that predominantly we're thinking about Central and Latin American artists, bringing them to Venice, to that cultural landscape, because we saw a lot of parallels in how it's constructed in regards of not looking so much at a local context, not really sort of highlighting the problems that are there. And we were really interested in how similar questions were addressed, yet in completely different local and geographical sort of contexts. So once the biennial got cancelled due to this moment of crisis that we're currently experiencing, it sort of unraveled this idea to us that this urgency that we felt is already represented in the art world we were thinking about is also very, very dominant within the art world itself, in its logistics, in this total lack of care that there is no such thing as permanent contracts on a biennial system, that there's a huge issue of who you think about your own workers and the extractivism that it brings forward towards the location of a biennial, towards the people working there, oftentimes also towards the artists that are participating, and that there's a lack of responsibility and accountability to say, we as people within the culture field always have these ideas that, you know, there's ideology behind it, or at least we always thought that, and that there's a huge sort of disbalance and paradox surrounding these issues. And we started getting a lot more into research, and kind of naturally just became so much bigger than one exhibition project, but it really became this idea of thinking together and the wealth of information and other collective works that is out there, and this idea of we have to, that not working against each other, and not so much anymore this idea of, you know, the single person, the single voice, the single idea that of greatness, but that to really shift it and to think of how we can address these things vis-a-vis other people, not only people, but also, you know, nature, non-human agents, to really think about why and for whom are you even doing this work. And I think on that sense, or on that level, it was almost beneficial to have this moment where almost everything was turned upside down, and there's this vacuum, and people take this moment to breathe and really reassess, because as long as, you know, you're in this mode of running towards for the next opening, for the next exhibition, for the next project, you very rarely really reflect on what you're doing and where you're going with it. And I think this, on the one hand, very destructive and horrible moment for the culture scene is also a moment that allows us to really rethink what we're doing, and to reorient it, and maybe even completely uproot it and reconstruct it, and not to start from scratch, but also, yes, to actually really start from scratch. And I think it came quite naturally then out of that. We started a project called Romanticizing Venice, where we really specifically look into the aspects of tourism there, of theatricality, of these modes of authenticity that are obviously not, in general, this idea within the art world that we always pretend, you know, that there's a visual objects, that they're not sort of layered with problems, and it just sort of unraveled from there. And we now sort of move away to, we started with Venice as an example case, and now we look at cities within Croatia, but also within Central America, where once again the same sort of paradox is happening, where you construct a cultural identity, a visual identity that's very one-dimensional, because you cater it towards masterism, towards one gaze, towards an almost marketable identity, and this idea that you can, you know, say, this is what one city looks like, this is what all the people living there looks in, and therefore, you know, I can create one postcard and that captures this reality, and that's one that I can sell the best. So I think that was one thing that we became really interested in, and out of this idea of orientation and the gaze and who's looking from where, we sort of took this opportunity with Next Museum to almost grab one of the aspects out of the idea of cartography, because working on themes like landscape and gaze and constructed realities, it was really, really helpful to further think of cartography almost, you know, using this platform to deepen it and to really reach new artistic formats. And I think Sarah is really the person to particularly talk about that. So I'm handing over.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, that's a lot of the work that we do as the collective Rewilding, and we've been interested in a variety of topics, and more importantly, the ways in which all these topics actually relate to each other. So one of the things that we do as a collective is in this laboratory manner is to explore the paradoxes of many of these issues that we're living in today, whether that's a question of crisis or whether that's a question of territory and identity. So we want to have these two dimensions of looking at the problems from a very local, very specific vantage point, as much as it is from a global and kind of distant vantage point, so that we can always reconcile, between the two dimensions. And so, having said that, our open call is for our next project, which is titled "Mapping the Cartographic: Contemporary Approaches to Planetarization," follows a lot of those questions and a lot of those concerns, and more importantly, a lot of those methodologies, which I will tell you more about in a second. The open call basically foregrounds this interest in also thinking about the ways in which technology mediates our relationship to nature, to landscapes, to territory, presupposing a particular kind of naturalness, realness, right, to nature. So at the heart of many of the questions that we're asking in this open call and of the conversations that we hope to have with all of you is precisely how can we not take for granted the role that technology plays in all of these representations, and more importantly, how are they situating the viewer, or how are you as artists, for those of you who are submitting works, how are you helping position the viewer in your representations to a particular relationship to what is it that is being represented, whether that's an idea of nature, of landscape, or anthropogenic views of the world, right, where we see a diminishing earth. And so what happens with the viewer? Where is that subject being placed is one of the things that we really want to get at. So that's why for the open call, we talked a little bit about how, going back in time, the consolidation of mapping since the 16th century resulted from the era of European imperialism and the use of one-point perspectives, turned space into an element to be measured and rendered mathematically. This paradigm has become so ubiquitous that we think of it as natural and universal, especially after Earth's famous satellite visualization called the blue marble. I don't know if you all identified, but it's this satellite image of the Earth that was taken in 1972. Contemporary art has engaged in a view of the planet where Earth, as W.T.J. Mitchell explains, is treated as an image, right? Where the planet is in itself and in its entirety always treated as image. This is so much so that to enter space today is like entering a virtual picture where the subject is only but a character in a preconceived image or a stage. In that sense, the exhibition approaches the question of planetarization, right, of thinking of the planet and thinking of territory in its global sphere, and seeks to inquire into practices that counter the sense of the real space, like how real space is defined by algorithmic representations, as these add to the extensive repertoire of nature through its digital manifestations, right? So for this, for example, Jussi Parikka explains that, and I'm going to quote here, our relationship with Earth are mediated through technologies and techniques of visualization, signification, calculation, mapping, prediction, simulation, and so forth. It is through and in media that we grasp Earth as an object for cognitive, practical, and effective relationships, end quote. That is why we call for artistic projects that subvert conventional cartographic representations by proposing other relationships to space and territory. And in that sense, we want to ask, for example, how can these artistic projects undermine the technification of the natural and its rendition as real, right? Because I feel like, for example, high definition imaging, satellite imaging, they presuppose a particular, with their sophistication, a particular idea of the real that blurs the lines between representation and what is being represented, right? Nature and its representation, making us almost believe that what we see in images is reality. So we're interested in that, in the blurring of those lines, and how can these artistic projects help us bring attention to the role that technology is playing in underscoring a particular technological or mediated relationship with the real, right? And another question that we're asking in those terms is how is digital representations mediating our changing notions of nature as boundary, as resource, or as engendered terrain? and more importantly, who is doing the mapping, why, and for what purposes. Right, so these are some of the very large questions that we hope to just kind of leave out there for people to submit their work in thinking about the various kinds of propositions that could address some of these issues, right? So we want it to be broad, but at the same time hoping that these conversations and this kind of curatorial process will enable us to finesse the display, to finesse the exhibition project, so that we can, more importantly, address some of these questions with an open mind, and of course, always leaving them open so that we can continue exploring through them. And as I was telling you before, the questions of laboratory and how the collective works, thinking through these questions, basically always as experiments, right? We were thinking of some of the questions that are not only questions for the open call that presuppose a particular theme or subject where the works of art are about illustrations of that theme, but we're very much interested in using the space of the exhibition as an opportunity to further inquire into the work of art, right? To interrogate the work of art and the visual proposition in ways that helps us yield further information, right? And that is, again, the question of the subject. How is the subject positioned within these representations? Because it's not just about rendering a particular idea of the natural space, or even undermining, historical modes of representation of landscape and territory, but it's also about, what else is out there, and where is the subject? How can we bring back that idea of the local, that idea of the object, the subject position within that viewing, that element of viewing, or that exercise of looking, right? So to already underscore and to unpack the notion of perspective as something that also underscores a particular vantage point or a particular place from which the viewing is being done, right? So in a moment of crisis, in a moment of climate change, in a moment when planetarization and even the pandemic has given us even a further layer of what global interconnectivity looks like, we really want to ask those questions of where are these representations leaving us as agents also within the storytelling that they are manifesting. And in those lines, the last question that we want to interrogate is our audiences, our works of art, and you artists, is what are the political, ethical, and social implications of these representations? What is the relationship between these ubiquitous conventions of planetary territorialities with the contemporary subject, right? So we don't want to also lose track of what does it mean to look at the representations of territory today, in 2020. I think that that's a very important, always underscoring from where we're doing the looking, which is, this very particular year with where enormous amounts of emergencies coalesce together, and that has, of course, changes as a subjects, as citizens, as or as nation states or whatever. And so we want to be able to bring that attention to the viewer, to feel grounded, to feel situated within this modes and very common use of representations of nature that we're seeing now in contemporary art. So that's a little bit of, an into the open call. And again, if you have questions, please address them in the chat. This is also an invitation for you to join us in the Telegram. We're very much looking forward to having this conversation back and forth with you. And Sabina will tell you more about also what the submissions have been so far and how they relate to the open call.
Great.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Maybe before we continue with Sabina, there are not questions yet, but some comments in the chat. So Tim says, interesting if you take the first pictures of the Earth from the moon, blue marble and Earthwise, and what they brought to the world. And Yvonne suggested an artist, or says a very nice work is still from US German artist Ingo Günther, World Processor. I don't know if you know it. And Sabine is saying, really nice, the lab is then process driven, with an emphasis on subjectivity and awareness on the positioning.
Yeah, I think we're having two Sabinas in generally
Yes.
in the chat. Quite lovely. Just not to confuse people. Also, sort of bring it back very quickly to this idea of where you looked from. I think is that one of the very strange parts of how we worked together was that we first, interestingly enough, used Instagram as a way almost to conduct our work. So, and we have a website that you might have all, of course, checked out already. But we also have an Instagram channel that's weirdly active, and it's a way of how we think together. So it's Sabina, Sarah, and me are all in different locations, obviously. And I think one of this interests where, I think usually it's quite problematic also, social media, also particularly within a museum context, because it's obviously very, very biased and very shallow medium. But these limitations of only being able to use 2,000 signs almost challenged us to be extremely precise in the beginning of our work and what we actually wanted to ask and how we wanted to formulate it and how we can reach out to people. And it also made us realize quite quickly who Instagram is showing what. So if you look at the cartography sort of online media and, who can access which websites, and not just, in sense of Asia and VPNs and language barriers and technology, but also which generations have access, what kind of wealth groups have access to which internet communication, who is looking at what medium, what can you actually show, the bias that, we've all seen it in the American election that was last week, and it was, I think, flooding the world with news about it, while there's, a terror attack in Vienna, and in Palestine there's displacement of people again, and in Poland there's horrible laws being passed against women. Like, it's very interesting how media is directing us, and I think we saw that almost as a part of where we're looking from and how we work together, that between the three of us we use this almost as a communication tool with each other, that we post things and edit it with each other. So it's a really interesting, weird way that we didn't expect, almost this methodology that works. So I think just to kind of give that nudge and one shameless self-promotion to check out our Instagram, because it's constantly changing and really weird and obviously not thought through. But also to almost have that as a way of thinking with other people, that you can have these really weird channels. And I think it's one of the reasons why we think about some of the things such as locality and who we reach, which Sabina will now go over more with some of the artist productions.
Thank you. So first of all, I would very much like to thank everyone who submitted their work so far. I think it has been such a joy reading them through and getting so many interesting insights to the topic. We were definitely not expecting it. It really blew our minds. And I would definitely want to use this opportunity to invite some of you who maybe haven't so far to submit your works. Now that you heard more about what the open call is about, maybe you get inspired and you find something that fits the open call. We are definitely still getting them. Today, just before this meeting, we got a new submission, and the open call is actually going to be online until the end of December, so you definitely have a lot of time. But again, if you want to further contribute into further developing the topic without submitting artworks, you can do that as well in the Telegram chat that we have been mentioning. So it is, as Sabina says now here in the comment, it's funny, Sabina. As Sabina says here in the comment, it's a very process-driven project, and this is actually making us work very detailed and going a lot in a lot of depth. So when in my part of the talk, I would like to actually talk more about how the submitted works relate to our topic, and how and about how the selection is going to be taking place. As far as you might have already seen, the outcome of this open call is to have an exhibition, which is going to be taking place in winter 2022, so basically a year and a half away from now. And the question that keeps being raised is, where is this exhibition going to be taking place? As maybe some of you don't know, but both three of us, Amelie, Sarah, and me, are located in different locations. We don't have a space. We are a collective. The where is still going to remain a mystery, but we are in communication with a very interesting institution that wants to host our exhibition. But since the details are still being discussed, we don't want to reveal the location until everything is, set in stone, as they say it. But one thing is sure, we are extremely happy about this collaboration. So with that being said, it becomes very clear for you and for us as well that we have the entire year of 2021 to prepare the exhibition in a lot of details. this is where I find, well, I think we all share the opinion, we find the collaboration or this platform, the Next Museum, to be very interesting because it allows us to develop the project together with a community of interested individuals, but also professionals. So it is a very interesting process that we weren't sure about where it's going to lead us, but it's leading us in a very, very nice direction. So I actually have made a little presentation. So this is Alina is going to share her screen with us. Yes. So I'll just start talking. After the open call ends, the selection process will be taking place during the first months of 2021, and we'll be looking at, as Sarah already mentioned, how the artworks relate to the project questions, how they counter or challenge the traditional map-making practices, the mathematication of the world and space, and how they bring new perspectives or showing us both the knowledge about the world, but also the knowledge about being in the world. The idea of being in the world is something that is often being forgotten when we do research. So I find it very interesting that we are getting a lot of interesting submissions about that as well. So we have some examples. For example, 3 artists submitted their works. They are challenging the one-point perspective of looking from the human-centric narrative of the place. And they are challenging that by showing us the perspective of the world beyond that of the human. So we have, for example, what you can see here is the work called Iceberg, submitted by Fernando Velasquez, who looks at icebergs that wander around the oceans and sea until they disappear. So we are looking at the allegory of the iceberg in the project that is submitted. If you can go to the next slide. You can also see that we received the work that looks into the world in relation to the potato in a project called Cinematic Botany. And this is very interesting because there is an entire world beyond the human. And in the next slide, you also see that there is an art project that was offered to us by called Seashell's Bones, that looks into the world through the lens of the seashell. So these 3 art projects are engaged in the view of the planet that shifts away from the perspective we are used to and is opening up new narratives, new perspectives, and also new temporalities, because it is a different way of looking at the world that we are definitely not used to. With the mapping, the Cartographic project, you can go to the next slide. We are also diving into the questions that are often raised by critical cartography. And these are the questions that Sarah already mentioned. They are talking about who is doing the mapping, why, and for what purpose. So we have some works that were offered to us that are actually looking into these questions. So for example, Sarp Karamyuvuz is looking and reclaiming the Orientalist imaginary and is bringing the visual legacy of the Middle East into the present. And what we can see here in this slide, this is the work of Siana Petrova. This is the work of Siana Petrova, who is, it's called trauma mapping, and she aims to develop a methodology for creating a geographical map of physical injuries, illnesses, or other body experiences. In the next slide, you can actually see, I don't see, what am I looking at? It's Sabina Mikulic's work that collects a polyphony of expat and immigrant women's voices. Where they are talking about the notion of belonging to a place, and that way she's creating a new, very intimate and map that is subjective. It's a map that comes from experience, and it comes from a sense of belonging. So the projects are seeking to counter the sense of the real space and are entering the space of the subjective. They're also projects that are coming from the idea of experiencing things, and they're taking the subjective and the experiential part of the reality as legitimate as every other reality. So you can, finish the slides. So of course, I just mentioned a few here. We haven't had the chance to go through them all, of course, because we're waiting until the end of the open call. But I showed you these so that you can have an idea of how the selection process will be taking place. We haven't discussed all of the works so far, as the call is still open. And once again, it is amazing to see all of the interesting perspectives that the artists have been offering. Now, we are going to have a closer look, and we are going to, go into more details into the submitted works in the following months after the call is done. And that's why I keep inviting everyone to submit more works, because it's definitely a very interesting tool for us, and we're getting works that we would have probably never come across without the open call. So I would like to finish here. I don't know if you have any questions for us. This would be the time.
In the meantime, while people maybe start typing their questions and thinking about something or a comment if they want to offer one, I just wanted to say that in the Telegram, we did start this conversation, and I think this is also an opportunity for artists to contribute with more detail as to why they wanted to join the submission, or why they wanted to send a submission, why they wanted to join this conversation, and tell us from your point of view, what intrigues you about the project. So this is something that is already going on in the Telegram, and we invite the rest of you to also follow up with that conversation, to say something as to, something more specific about your work. If you also want to bring attention to us as we engage in the selection process or the reviewing process later on, and to other, other colleagues and other people who are also being part of this conversation as to what you think, in the work of art addresses some of these questions. Sometimes, we need a little bit more unpacking. So this is the opportunity to have this conversation. It's like the equivalent of a studio visit, where you would have, dedicated time to ask a question, to unpack a work of art. And so please help us by providing this information. We're very eager to hear from you. Yes, so that's basically some of it. I just want to say that Amelie had to run to another meeting, so she will not join us for the Q&A, but you're more than welcome to ask questions and comments.
Great. The other, Sabina just said, this is me. So I think the last artwork that you have shown is from her. So if you have questions for the other Sabina, you can just post them in the chat as well. And Tim is asking, do you have a final number of artists you want to show? This is not set in stone yet, as the venue is not safe.
I will. We don't have a final number, definitely not, because the institution we're talking with has several exhibition spaces. So it will be a thing that we will deal with in next year. So 2021 is going to be about details and, finalizing the number, the budget, and everything that goes with exhibition making.
Yeah. In that, I just also want to say that one of the things that, Amelie was talking about at the beginning of how we came together, especially around this one project we were supposed to do in Venice, it was a project that had a lot of emphasis, and that's something that we want to continue, precisely in the spirit of being a collective and a laboratory. And of course, this idea of further inquiring or interrogating the work of art is that we do, and we hope to place a lot of attention on public programs and forms of engagement, so that we can also not just have this conversation among us, but when there is an exhibition, to also bring some of these questions and some of these exchanges with the public, so that there are opportunities for close looking and for really talking about each one of the works of art. So we really look forward to having an in-depth conversation, as opposed to having a massive exhibition that just makes a survey of contemporary cartographic approaches. This is really about really thinking critically about the very idea of cartographies, its histories, and these various possibilities now and into the future.
Okay, I don't see any further questions, but Sabine says that it's a very great selection of works, and that it would be interesting to have kind of a curated artist talk where we could talk about methodologies or like a panel. I mean, from the start of Next Museum, it's always possible for sure. We can also use other mediums like Zoom or something else, and yeah, it would be great to have even bigger engagement with the artists, I guess, right?
Yeah,
And I think
definitely.
also,
Okay.
like we emphasize this a lot, but you know, artist talk, yes, we can do it as you know, an event for itself, but I think again, a Telegram can also be used for, you know, further unpacking the project, the proposed project. So this is a way to talk with us, other artists, and everyone who is involved in this process, where you can use the platform to definitely, you know, talk more about what happened, what is the background of the proposed artwork.
Especially because I think that the question of methodologies is really interesting from the point of the artist as much as from the point of the curatorial exercise. Because one of the things that we are really like trying to unpack here or address with a variety of projects that we do throughout the collective is not to be against technology, but to really not lose sight of it. Right? Sometimes we don't think of the role that technology plays, whether that's through photography, whether that's video, whether that's augmented reality or artificial intelligence or so on. Like these are or data, data visualization, algorithmic imaging. They made us lose sight of the role that technology plays in these representations. So the point is to also think methodologically about what role is technology playing in a variety of representations, because it's always there, right? So we don't want to assume that technology is neutral, that is or that is naive, that is just uninterested, that is just there to represent the world as we see it. We want to problematize that very idea that we're just looking through high definition imaging as if we're looking at the world with our own eyes. That is not the case. So we always, I think that in this engagement with the Telegram, or even in the future, if the exhibition allows for a robust public programming where we can invite you guys to have an artist talk, that these would be some of the things that we're interested in addressing, like not only just what is being represented, but how, through what methods, with what means, and what is technology doing to build a relationship between us, the viewers, and the representation itself, or us and this idea of nature, landscape, territory, because those concepts are also, fueled with particular kinds of ideologies, right? How do we and where and with what means do we understand territory, land, landscape? These are things that you guys also as artists bring into the table through your representations and your works of art. So we are very much interested in really getting to those questions.
Okay, so there's another comment by Yvonne in the Telegram chat, and she's just saying that it can be a great tool to document thoughts and ideas over time, and great to hear you all speaking and the enthusiasm.
Thank you.
Great. So yeah, you guys, if you have any further questions, you can post them anytime in the Telegram chat as well, right? So, and yeah, I don't know, we will for sure have another meetup, but we can just stay in contact via the channel. And yeah, 1.5 months left for the open call, right? Yeah. Great. So, okay. I think no more questions, and it's 4:45, so on point. Would you like anything to add or anything from your side?
No, I maybe stress one more time that all the media is out there, like the website. Please go and check the website, the Instagram. These are tools that you can also use to connect with us and to further this conversation. I'm sorry, Sabina, I cut you off. You were saying.
No, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining. So yeah, of course, thank you to Next Museum as well. We really like the initiative. I think it's a great tool, a great platform, because it is working on many levels. It's connecting curators with artists, but it's also connecting institutions with curators. It's a very interesting platform, and I think we are very happy to be, part of it.
Great, thank you. Great. Maybe just one more comment. Next week, on Thursday, we have another event by nextmuseum.io. It's called It's Tech Time. So speaking of technology, and we want to present new innovative technologies regarding the Museum of the Future. And the topic is multi-sensorial journeys. And so you're all invited to join. You can find the event on our website and just join via Zoom. And yeah, and also, yeah, a great topic for the digital. Unfortunately, we can't host it at the museum, but we will be happy if you join online.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you. And you can watch the replay via Crowdcast and also on our YouTube channel if you missed the first minutes or something. Great. Okay. So thank you guys, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.